Have you ever looked at a painting for too long and felt something staring back? What if I told you that in some paintings, the gaze is not just an illusion, but a cry for help? If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Tell us about your stories and where you're watching from. Have you ever stared too long at a painting and felt something staring back? Some say it's just an illusion. But what if I told you that in certain paintings, the eyes are more than just paint? What if they were pleading, begging for release? Clara Mendonça pulled her coat tighter as she approached the grand, crumbling estate of Gaspar Lemoine. The mansion loomed against the sky, its stone facade weathered and cracked as though the house itself had been exhaling dust for centuries. The wrought iron gate groaned in protest as she pushed it open. She had researched Lemoine extensively. A reclusive artist, famous for his grotesquely vivid portraits of clowns. His work was legendary, each painting disturbingly lifelike, every expression captured with eerie precision. His subjects seemed frozen in a silent performance, their hollow eyes holding secrets no one could decipher. But there was something else, a rumor, a whisper among art collectors and journalists. People who modeled for him disappeared. Clara dismissed the thought. Sensationalism sells. Lemoine was just an eccentric genius, and she was here for an exclusive interview, a golden opportunity. The massive door creaked open before she could knock. Gaspar stood there, waiting. A thin man, dressed in a dark velvet robe, his sharp features framed by graying curls. His smile was polite, but his eyes, deep, unreadable, like a painter's palette smudged with forgotten colors. "Miss Mendonça," he said, his voice smooth, almost hypnotic. "Welcome. You are right on time." Clara stepped inside, and the air changed. The dimly lit corridor was lined with his paintings, clowns of all kinds, frozen in expressions of sorrow, mirth, terror. The scent of oil paint and something faintly metallic clung to the air. The walls felt closer than they should have. She had seen photographs of his work before, but nothing compared to this. The eyes. Every single painting had eyes that seemed to follow her. She took a step forward, and they shifted, just slightly. "Exquisite, aren't they?" Gaspar murmured behind her. "Capturing the soul, and that is the true art, don't you think?" Clara swallowed. "Your work is incredibly lifelike." He chuckled softly, leading her further inside. "Lifelike?" he echoed. "Oh, my dear, life is merely the beginning." As they walked deeper into the house, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that she had just stepped onto a stage, one where the roles had already been decided. She turned a corner and stopped cold. There, in the dim light of the parlor, was a painting of a man she recognized, a fellow journalist, a man who had gone missing years ago. His painted eyes were wide, as if screaming from inside the frame. The room seemed to shrink around Clara as she stared at the painting. The face in the frame belonged to Eduardo Vasquez, a journalist who had mysteriously vanished 5 years ago. She had read about his case. One day he simply disappeared, leaving behind an unfinished article about an artist whose work disturbed him, an artist obsessed with clowns. Gaspar's voice sliced through her thoughts. "Ah, you recognize him, don't you?" Clara turned slowly. Gaspar was watching her. His expression was unreadable, a slight smirk tugging at his lips. But his eyes, those dark, knowing eyes, studied her reaction with an intensity that made her skin crawl. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I believe I've seen this face before." Gaspar's smile deepened. "Yes, he was a fascinating subject. Such strong features, so much character. A shame truly how some souls vanish into obscurity." Clara's pulse quickened. Some souls vanish? Was it a coincidence? Or was Gaspar confirming something? She forced herself to smile. "Your paintings feel almost alive." "Because they are." Her breath caught. Gaspar chuckled, waving a dismissive hand. "Figuratively, of course. A true artist captures more than just the flesh. He captures the essence, the truth beneath the mask." His fingers brushed the painting's surface, and Clara swore she saw a flicker of movement in Eduardo's painted eyes. She needed to calm down. She needed to keep him talking. "Tell me about your process," she said, pulling out her notebook. "How do you make your subjects look so expressive?" Gaspar exhaled, pleased. "Ah, a wonderful question. Come, let me show you." He led her deeper into the mansion, down a corridor where the air grew thicker, heavier. The walls here were lined with unfinished sketches, faces half-formed, eyes staring from incomplete figures as if frozen mid-scream. At the end of the hall, a large wooden door stood slightly ajar. Gaspar pushed it open, revealing his studio. Clara stepped inside and immediately wished she hadn't. The space was vast, yet suffocating. Easels stood in rows, some draped with cloth, others displaying their grotesque subjects. Brushes, palettes, and dozens of small glass jars filled with pigments lined the shelves. But it was the centerpiece of the room that sent ice crawling down Clara's spine. A single canvas stood on an ornate frame, a work in progress. A clown, half finished. And though the face was incomplete, Clara knew exactly who it was. The brushstrokes, the contours of the jaw, the curve of the lips. It was her own face staring back. Clara's breath came in shallow gasps. The half-finished painting before her was undeniably her own face. Though the features were incomplete, her likeness was unmistakable. The arch of her brow, the curve of her cheek, even the faintest shadow of a worried line on her forehead. But what unsettled her most was the expression. The painted Clara was smiling. Not a joyful, natural smile. No, it was something grotesque, an exaggerated frozen grin. The corners of the mouth stretched too wide, the eyes hollow, pleading. Behind her, Gaspar exhaled with satisfaction. "Ah, you've found her." Clara turned slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Me?" "Well, not yet," he murmured, stepping forward. "But soon." A chill slithered down her spine. She forced a laugh, though it came out weak. I don't recall ever sitting for a portrait." Gaspar smiled, tilting his head as he studied her. "You didn't, not in the way you think." His fingers traced the edge of the canvas. "You see, Clara, true art is not about imitation. It's about capturing something deeper. Essence, truth. The moment a subject steps into my world, their image begins to take form. The painting anticipates them. It prepares itself." Clara felt bile rise in her throat. She needed to leave. Now. Feigning composure, she took a careful step back. "Fascinating. But I think I have enough for my article." Gaspar tisked. "Leaving so soon, but I haven't finished my masterpiece." Clara took another step, but suddenly, the room spun, the walls warped, shifting like wet paint dripping down a canvas. The scent of oil and something metallic, coppery, grew thicker, clinging to her throat. Her vision blurred. The paintings moved. A grotesque chuckle echoed from one of the frames. Another let out a long, shuddering sigh. Then, a whisper. "Help. Us." Clara whipped around. The voices came from the paintings. Gaspar watched, unfazed. "They always resist at first," he sighed. "But in the end, they all become part of the collection." She tried to bolt, but the door was gone. Where it had been just seconds ago was now a blank canvas, a massive, untouched stretch of white, and then the brush lifted. It hovered in the air as if held by invisible hands. Slowly it dipped into a deep red paint. Gaspar turned to her, his smile widening. "Shall we begin?" The brush moved on its own, dragging a thick crimson stroke across the canvas, and Clara felt something warm trickle down her cheek. Clara's fingers trembled as she wiped her cheek. Blood. A thin, warm trickle had appeared beneath her left eye, mirroring the exact path the brush had taken across the blank canvas. She stared at Gaspar, horror clenching around her throat. "What's happening to me?" she whispered. Gaspar exhaled as if savoring a masterpiece in progress. "Ah, it begins." The brush lifted again, gliding across the canvas in another slow, deliberate stroke. And as it did, agony lanced through Clara's skin. She cried out, clutching, her arm where an invisible force carved an identical mark. It wasn't a cut, it felt deeper, as if her very essence was being peeled away. The paintings around her groaned. She turned wildly, her gaze darting from frame to frame. The painted figures twisted, their faces contorting with pain. Their lips trembled, some whispering, others sobbing. "He paints with souls." The voice came from Eduardo's painting. His painted eyes, no longer mere pigment, stared directly at her. "He traps us here. We are no longer flesh, only color. You must stop him before—" His voice cut off. Gaspar had placed a hand on the canvas, pressing firmly. Eduardo's face distorted as if submerged in water, his mouth stretching in a soundless scream before vanishing into the layers of paint. "They talk too much," Gaspar muttered. Clara's stomach twisted. She had to get out. Fighting the dizziness clawing at her, she lunged for the shelves, knocking over jars of paint in a desperate attempt to disrupt his work. Glass shattered, thick, colors oozing across the floor like spilled guts. Gaspar laughed. "You misunderstand, my dear. Paint is nothing, it is the brush that holds the power." He raised the cursed brush high, and for a fraction of a second, Clara saw something moving within the bristles. Tiny, writhing faces, mouths gasping soundlessly. She stumbled back, her head throbbing. The paintings, the brush. The paint wasn't just pigment. It was them. Gaspar took a step closer, rolling his sleeves to reveal his forearms. Clara's stomach lurched. His veins were dark, too dark, like ink, coursing through his flesh. "Do you see now?" he asked, his voice soft, almost tender. "I do not just paint them, Clara, I become them. Their souls flow through me, through my brush, and they live forever in my art." His fingers grazed her wrist, sending a sharp, icy pain shooting through her bones. "And now, you will join them." The brush descended toward her face, and suddenly all the paintings screamed at once. The studio erupted in screams. The paintings howled, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of suffering. Some pleaded. Others shrieked in rage. The very walls seemed to breathe, their surfaces rippling as if something beneath the paint struggled to escape. Gaspar's expression darkened. "Ungrateful creatures," he muttered. "They forget the gift I have given them." Clara used the distraction. She lunged, knocking the cursed brush from his grasp. It clattered against the wooden floor, rolling toward a puddle of deep red paint. Gaspar's eyes widened in fury. "Foolish girl." The studio shuddered. The brush twitched, moving on its own. Clara dove for it, but Gaspar was faster. He snatched it up, his hand twisting unnaturally as the bristles flicked toward her. Pain. A searing, ice-cold slash burned across her arm, though no blade had touched her. A fresh streak of red appeared on the unfinished painting. Her blood now, part of the canvas. Gaspar grinned. "Just a few more strokes, Clara, then you will be complete." She staggered back, her body growing lighter. A terrible realization dawned. She was fading. Her reflection in a nearby glass pane was blurring as if she were becoming paint. No. No, she would not end like this. Her gaze darted to the other paintings, the trapped souls. Gaspar had power, but he had made a mistake. He had let them keep their voices. Clara turned to the frames, desperation burning through her fading limbs. "Help me," she pleaded. "You don't have to stay here. Fight him." For a moment, silence. Then, a whisper. "We can't." Eduardo's voice, weak, barely audible. "Yes, you can," Clara pushed. "He needs the brush, doesn't he? He needs you to be silent." The painting shuddered. Gaspar growled, realizing too late what was happening. "Be quiet," he snapped at them. "You are mine." The walls convulsed. A terrible wailing rose as the figures inside the paintings fought back. The colors shifted, their forms writhing, pushing against the prison of the canvas. The entire studio buckled, cracks spiderwebbing across the paintings as Gaspar stumbled. Clara seized the moment. She lunged, not for the brush, but for the largest canvas, the one where Gaspar had painted his first clown. If this was where it had begun, maybe it could end here too. With every ounce of strength, she ripped the painting from the wall. Gaspar screamed. The air shattered. The studio collapsed inward, pulling Clara into a whirlwind of color, screams, and darkness, as the world of paint swallowed her whole. Clara fell, or maybe she was being pulled. The studio around her dissolved into a maelstrom of color, reds, blues, deep inky black swirling in violent chaos. The walls stretched, melted, dripped like wet paint, their forms shifting between brushstrokes and reality. The screaming of the trapped souls filled her ears, and then silence. A deep, oppressive quiet. She stood in darkness. No studio, no Gaspar, no paintings. Just emptiness, but not for long. Slowly, a glow emerged around her. A dim, flickering light. She turned and gasped. The walls were returning, but they were no longer cracked and rotting. They were pristine. The paintings were back, vibrant, alive, but different. Where before they had been trapped in torment, now the figures stood tall. Their eyes gleamed with something new. Freedom. Gaspar was nowhere to be seen. No, that wasn't true. He was here. Clara turned, her pulse hammering. In the center of the studio, standing where his easel had once been, was a new painting. A clown. Gaspar's features were unmistakable. The sharp cheekbones, the dark piercing eyes now frozen in horror. His mouth was stretched into a wide, grotesque grin, but his painted eyes screamed. Clara stepped closer, heart pounding. Gaspar's fingers, now stiff with dried paint, clutched his brush as if trying to escape his own creation. His colors were rich, vibrant, too real. His body seemed caught mid-motion, like he had tried to step out of the frame but had been stopped, trapped, just as he had trapped so many before. Clara exhaled. She was not a painting. She was still here. The brush was gone, destroyed, and Gaspar was nothing but art. Behind her, the other paintings began to fade, their subjects vanishing. Their time here was over. She turned to Gaspar's portrait one last time, and for just a moment, she swore his painted lips moved. Clara. Weeks later, an art collector discovered an abandoned mansion filled with beautiful, eerie paintings. Among them, one stood out, a masterpiece of a clown, frozen mid-laugh. And if you looked closely, his eyes followed you wherever you went. If you liked this story and want more dark tales like this, don't forget to like, comment, and share. What did you think of Gaspar's fate? Has the curse really ended? Or will someone find the brush again? Leave your opinion in the comments, and remember, not every work of art is just paint on canvas. I have always believed that objects carry whispers of their past, faint echoes of hands that have held them, of rooms where they have rested. Yet never before had I encountered an artifact that seemed to breathe, to watch, to wait. It was a dim and rain-drenched afternoon when I found the peculiar thing, nestled amid the decaying remnants of forgotten trinkets in a shop that smelled of dust and regret. A clock. No, a clown. A grotesque painted face, its features frozen in an eternal grin, its glassy eyes rimmed in red, as though it had wept blood. The shopkeeper, a gaunt figure with hollow cheeks, regarded me with something bordering on pity as I placed the object on the counter. That one, he muttered, has a way of returning to its owner. His fingers hesitated over the cash register. Some things are better left alone. I dismissed his theatrics with a smirk, handing him a crumpled bill. I like collecting the unusual. The transaction was made, and with it, an unease settled in my chest, a feeling I shook off as mere superstition. That night, the clown clock sat upon my bedside table, its silent, unblinking gaze fixed upon me. I told myself it was only an object, nothing more. But then, at exactly 3 a.m., I awoke to a sound that turned my blood to ice. A laugh, not the chime of a clock. Not the ring of an alarm, a distorted, hollow laughter crackling like static through unseen lips. I bolted upright, heart hammering. My breath came shallow as I reached for the clock. It was still. Its hands pointed to 3, unmoving, and then I saw it. The clown's eyes. They were staring directly at me. They had moved. Had it always looked like that? Or had something changed? Objects shouldn't move on their own, should they? I did not sleep. How could I? My eyes remained locked upon the grinning thing, its painted features frozen in a silent mockery of my growing terror. I turned it over in my hands, fingers trembling. It was just a clock, an ordinary wind-up mechanism encased in porcelain. And yet the unease coiled around my throat like a vice. Had its gaze truly shifted? Or was it merely a trick of shadow, of restless imagination? By morning, I convinced myself that exhaustion had played cruel games upon my mind. Still, unease gnawed at the edges of my thoughts, refusing to be swallowed by logic. I decided to test my own sanity. That evening, before retiring to bed, I positioned the clock facing the wall, its grotesque face hidden from sight. If it remained so by morning, I would laugh at my own foolishness and be done with this absurd fear. I forced myself to sleep. But the night is cruel to those who seek comfort in reason. At 3 a.m., the laughter returned. Closer. My breath caught in my throat as I turned to the bedside table. The clown no longer faced the wall, it was turned toward me, and this time, its grin was wider. Was it merely my imagination? Or was the thing beginning to change? Laughter should bring joy, but this one only brings terror. Sleep abandoned me entirely. How could I rest when that damn thing moved in the night? I sat, in the dim glow of my bedside lamp, staring at the clock, willing it to remain still. My mind reeled with explanations. Sleepwalking, stress, a cruel trick of perception. But none could justify the feeling, the certainty, that something within it was watching. That night I took precautions. I locked it in a drawer. I secured the latch. I even stacked books atop it, as if mere weight could restrain whatever malevolence stirred within. And yet, at 3 a.m., I woke again. The laughter, shrill, warped, gleeful, spilled from the darkness like a secret shared between unseen lips. I bolted upright, pulse hammering against my ribs. The drawer remained shut, the books unmoved. Yet the sound was closer now, filling every corner of the room. I reached for the drawer, hesitant, breath shallow, and with a shaking hand I pulled it open. The clock was there, precisely as I had left it. But something was wrong. The glass face was cracked, and beneath it the painted mouth of the clown had twisted, as if it had been laughing too hard. Had the glass always been broken? Or was the thing changing? What if the object is no longer the real problem? I could not stay. Not in that room. Not with that thing. The moment the first light of dawn crept through my window, I stuffed the clock into a bag, refusing to look at its fractured glass, its contorted grin. I needed distance. A hotel, yes, a hotel would do. A night away would silence this madness, prove that the laughter existed only in my mind. By evening, I was settled into a dim, unfamiliar room, the city's distant hum muffling the lingering echoes of unease. I had left the clock at home, locked within a cabinet, and yet, at 3 a.m., the laughter returned. I shot upright, my skin cold with dread. The room was silent save for the rhythmic ticking of the bedside clock, not the clown's clock. That was impossible. And then, from the darkness near the mirror, the laughter came again. A breath, not mine. Trembling, I turned my gaze to the mirror and saw a reflection that was not my own, a shape hunched in the shadows behind me, grinning. I spun around, nothing. But the bedsheets beside me were indented, as if someone, or something, had just been sitting there. Had I truly escaped? The clock? Or had something followed me? You can leave a house, Mina, but can you leave what's already inside you? I did not return home. I couldn't. The reflection in the mirror haunted me, that grinning thing, watching from the shadows. No sleep came, only the hollow ache of exhaustion, the fevered whispers of paranoia creeping into my mind. By morning, I resolved to destroy it. The clock, the source of all this madness. I would burn it. I drove home with a purpose, my hands gripping the wheel too tightly, my breath shallow. The key turned in the lock, the door groaned open. Silence. A dreadful, expectant silence. I approached the cabinet where I had sealed the wretched thing. My fingers hesitated over the handle. I would take it, throw it into the flames and end whatever curse it carried. I yanked the cabinet open, empty. No clock, just the faintest echo of laughter, drifting from the hallway. I turned, and there it was, sitting upon my bed, waiting. Only now the clown was different. Its painted hands were raised, fingers outstretched, as if inviting me closer. Had I ever been in control? Or had it always been? Leading me here? When the clock strikes, will I still be myself? I wanted to run. God, I wanted to run. But my feet, my body would not obey. The clown sat there unmoving, yet somehow alive. Its outstretched hands, its twisted grin. They were waiting, calling me. And then the alarm rang. A sharp, shrieking noise. Not laughter, but something worse. A mechanical wail that split my mind apart like glass against stone. The walls shuddered. The room darkened. The air thickened. And the clown, it began to move. Not a twitch. Not a tremor. A full, deliberate motion like a puppet freed from its strings. Its head tilted, its grin stretched. And then, it stood up. The last thing I remember before the darkness took me was the clock's hands, spinning wildly, faster, faster, until they stopped. At 3 a.m. And then, silence. I awoke to a different room, or perhaps a different existence. The walls were painted. No, they were canvas. My limbs felt stiff. My skin, porcelain. A mirror stood before me. I saw my reflection. Only it was not me. It was a clown, grinning forever. The collector is gone. The clown remains. And somewhere in some forgotten shop, a new alarm clock waits for its next owner.